The night smelled of jasmine, champagne, and betrayal. Under the golden chandelier of the Plaza Hotel, Manhattan's elite toasted to Davenport Capital's record profits. Cameras flashed, violins hummed, and Grace Whitmore Davenport, radiant in a silver gown, held her secret like a heartbeat, the ultrasound photo folded inside her clutch. When she leaned close to whisper it to her husband Cole, his smile froze mid-toast. "I'm pregnant," she said softly. The word should have lit his eyes. Instead, his jaw locked, the smile stretched too wide, too practiced. "Now," he hissed between his teeth, still clinking glasses as photographers captured what looked like a perfect marriage. Across the ballroom, Sable Hart, the 24-year-old model in a crimson Dior dress, watched them with a feline grin. Cole's hand found Grace's wrist, gentle at first, then tightening. "We'll talk outside," he said. In the marble corridor, Grace barely had time to breathe before he snapped. "You ruined everything. Tonight was about investors, not your announcement." His voice cracked like glass. She tried to speak, but he shoved her shoulder hard enough to send her stumbling against the wall. The ultrasound slipped from her clutch and fluttered to the floor. "Security," Cole barked, adjusting his cufflinks. "See that Mrs. Davenport gets home safely. She's unwell." The guards hesitated. No one dared defy a billionaire. Grace's vision blurred with humiliation. She clutched the ultrasound, tears smudging the ink, and whispered, "Cole, please, it's your child." He didn't even look at her. Sable appeared in the doorway, perfume sweet and sharp. "Is there a problem?" she purred. Cole turned toward her with a smile Grace had once died for. "No problem at all." Cameras caught Grace, being led out through the lobby, her silver gown brushing marble floors that reflected 1,000 pitying eyes. Outside, the January wind hit like punishment. Paparazzi flashes followed her into the cold night. Her phone buzzed, one message from Victor Hale, her godfather. "Get out tonight. Don't argue." Through the glass doors, she saw Sable rest her manicured hand on Cole's arm as the crowd cheered another toast. Grace turned away, trembling, clutching her stomach. Behind her, a hotel camera blinked red, recording everything: the shove, the plea, the truth. Victor Hale stood in the shadows by the revolving door, phone raised, eyes cold as steel. Grace took one last look at the plaza, that glittering cage of betrayal. Then she whispered to the child growing inside her, "We'll come back someday, baby. And when we do, they'll remember this night." And somewhere inside the hotel, Cole laughed, never realizing that the video of that single shove would destroy him years later. The cab smelled like old leather and rain. Grace sat in the back seat, trembling, one hand wrapped around her clutch, the other over her stomach. Manhattan lights smeared against the window like melting gold. Her heart thudded too loud to think. She had nowhere to go, no one she could trust, except Victor Hale. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed again. "Go to JFK. Ticket under the name Grace Whitman. Don't look back." The message vanished seconds later. She leaned forward, voice shaking. "JFK. Delta Terminal. My." As the cab sped through the empty streets, memories stabbed her. Cole's voice, his laughter with Sable, the look in his eyes when he said, "You ruined everything." By dawn, Grace stood at gate 21 with nothing but a small suitcase, her mother's locket, and the ultrasound folded inside a worn Tiffany envelope. When the plane lifted off, she pressed her palm to her stomach and whispered, "We're safe now." Below her, New York shrank into glittering ashes. In San Francisco, she rented a tiny one-bedroom near the bay. The landlord never asked questions. She used her mother's maiden name, Whitman, and a prepaid phone Victor sent in a plain Amazon box. Nights blurred into silence and nausea, days into exhaustion. She ate saltines and read meditations on her Kindle, trying to quiet the panic. A month later, Martha Reyes, the Whitmore family's old housekeeper, appeared at her door with 2 duffel bags and a casserole. "Your mother made me promise," Martha said. "Wherever you are, I'll find you." Grace collapsed into her arms, sobbing for the first time since the gala. Together, they built a life that didn't look like survival. Martha scrubbed the walls, cooked soup, and kept every newspaper folded backwards so Grace wouldn't see headlines about Cole and Sable. Grace took online MBA classes, her MacBook Air balancing on stacks of unopened mail. Between classes, she freelanced as a data analyst for small shipping companies, a cover that soon became a calling. At night, the fog rolled in thick from the bay. She would stand by the window, hand on her stomach, whispering to her unborn child about courage and dignity. Each whisper became a vow. You will never know shame. You will never see me beg. 3 months later, she opened a folder labeled Project Meridian. It was nothing more than spreadsheets and algorithms, but it was hers, a tool to cut costs and detect corruption in logistics networks, inspired by the greed that destroyed her marriage. She didn't know it yet, but that file would one day destroy Cole's empire. When the nausea returned, she traveled quietly to Boston for prenatal care under the name Grace Whitman. The doctor never asked about her husband. She kept appointments at odd hours, always looking over her shoulder. Back in San Francisco, the tabloids began printing sources, claiming she'd fled rehab, that she was unstable, unfaithful. Sable posted glossy photos with Cole at the Ritz-Carlton, her diamond ring catching every camera flash. Each picture felt like a blade twisting in Grace's chest, but she refused to bleed publicly. She poured her fury into code, each line of data another heartbeat of control. One stormy night, Martha found her crying over the ultrasound photo. "Let them talk," Martha said gently. "Truth doesn't drown, it waits." Grace looked up, eyes swollen but fierce. "Then we'll wait too, and when the truth rises, I want him to watch it." She opened her laptop, renamed the file the disappearance file, and backed it up twice. One copy in the cloud, one on a silver flash drive. She didn't know it yet, but that file would become her weapon, the seed of revenge growing quietly beneath the noise of lies. Boston slept under a curtain of snow the night Grace went into labor. The streets were silent, lamps glowing through the storm like watchful eyes. Martha drove the old Toyota through the blizzard, jaw set, knuckles white on the wheel. Grace's breaths came sharp, her body trembling, but her voice was steady. "Just a little further, Martha. Don't stop." They reached Street Vincent Hospital at 3:47 a.m. The nurse rushed her inside, no husband's name on the form. "Father's information?" she asked. Grace hesitated, then whispered, "None." The nurse nodded quietly, typing Whitman Grace. Hours passed in flashes of light and pain. By sunrise, 3 cries pierced the sterile air. Ava first, fierce and loud. Then Theo, small but stubborn. And finally Lily, calm and steady, blinking up at the ceiling as if she already understood everything. Grace laughed through tears, her hands trembling as she held all 3 at once. Martha pressed 3 hospital bracelets into her palm. "They're fighters, just like their mother." Grace smiled faintly. "No. Better." The doctor congratulated her, but his eyes flicked toward the door. Reporters had been calling the hospital since dawn. Someone leaked her alias. Victor's bodyguard arrived in a gray coat, handing her an envelope, new IDs, new birth certificates, and a key to a safe house outside the city. Before leaving, Grace tucked the ultrasound into a Tiffany envelope and sealed it with tape. On the front, she wrote, "For Ava, Theo, and Lily, when you're old enough to understand why we hid." The safe house in Cambridge was small but warm. Martha turned the living room into a nursery with borrowed cribs and thrifted toys. Snow piled on the window ledge while Grace rocked the babies under soft lamplight. She hummed old jazz tunes her mother used to play. Nights were long, but not lonely. The cries, the feedings, the soft heartbeat of 3 new lives filled every silence. When exhaustion hit, she would open her mother's locket, a tiny photo inside, and whisper, "You'd be proud, wouldn't you?" Victor visited only once a month, always after dark. He brought groceries, diapers, and updates about New York. Cole's company thrived, his image spotless beside Sable's glittering smile. The tabloids called them America's power couple. Grace pretended not to care, but the pain still flickered in her eyes. One evening, Victor set a small silver flash drive on her table. "I've backed up the disappearance file. You'll need it someday." She frowned. "For what?" Victor's voice softened. "Because men like him always repeat their sins. When he does, you'll be ready." A year later, The babies took their first steps on the same day. Martha cheered. Grace laughed until she cried. That night, when everyone slept, she wrote letters to her children, one for each birthday until they turned 18. Each letter carried a truth, courage, dignity, and the belief that pain can become power. As she sealed the final envelope, her laptop pinged, a business email from a local logistics firm offering part-time data work. She smiled, realizing destiny was circling back in disguise. She accepted, signing her name Grace Whitman. Outside, the snow had melted into a soft drizzle. She stepped onto the porch, holding Lily against her chest, watching the first pink streaks of dawn spread across the Boston sky. For the first time since that night at the plaza, she felt hope, fragile, trembling, but alive. And as the morning light touched her face, Grace whispered to her children, "Someday, we'll go home." But not as victims, as proof. By the time the triplets turned 2, the rhythm of Grace's life had transformed from panic to purpose. The mornings smelled of oatmeal and crayons. Nights hummed with lullabies and the soft clicking of a keyboard. While the children napped, Grace sat by the window with her MacBook Air, working quietly on the foundation of a future no one would see coming. She named it Meridian. A simple data analytics tool that could flag financial irregularities in supply chains, built from her anger, refined by her intellect. She coded in silence, often with Lily asleep across her lap and a baby monitor blinking nearby. Each line of code was an act of defiance against the man who had called her weak. Martha teased her gently. "You're supposed to rest when they sleep." Grace smiled without looking up. Rest doesn't rebuild legacies. In 2018, an email arrived from a VH Ventures. It offered a small investment and mentorship. Grace hesitated, sensing Victor's discreet signature behind the initials. The money came through a Delaware trust, untraceable to his name, and enough to hire 2 part-time developers. With Victor's silent support, Meridian grew. Within 18 months, the software was being tested by regional shipping companies along the West Coast. Grace never used her real last name, never attended meetings in person. She was simply G. Whitman, founder. Her days were long, her life small but steady. She'd wake before dawn, pour Starbucks coffee into a chipped mug, and check data logs before waking the children. The walls of their small Cambridge rental were lined with sticky notes, ideas for better algorithms, color-coded grocery lists, and tiny handprints painted in blue. Every night before bed, she whispered the same promise to her kids. "We are not running. We are preparing." In New York, meanwhile, Cole Davenport's empire expanded. Sable's face filled luxury magazines. Their names were linked to new towers on Park Avenue. Grace avoided the news, but Victor occasionally left manila folders on her porch. Financial statements, shareholder lists, quiet warnings. One night, she noticed a familiar name buried deep inside those documents. Whitmore Holdings, dormant subsidiary. It was her mother's company, absorbed years ago by Davenport Capital. Grace stared at the page, realizing her inheritance had never been dissolved, just buried. She began digging, piece by piece. Public records, old board filings, and archived contracts. With every discovery, her fury sharpened into strategy. She wasn't just building a company anymore, she was building an engine for justice. By the time Meridian hit its 3rd year, the system flagged its first major fraud pattern in a Davenport Capital shipping affiliate. Grace's pulse pounded as she stared at the data, the proof lighting her screen. She didn't expose it yet. Timing was everything. Instead, she improved the algorithm and presented the case study anonymously at a logistics conference. The paper won a quiet award. Victor called her that night. "You understand what this means?" "Yes," Grace said, watching her children draw in the next room. "It means he's still dirty, and I know exactly how to clean him." Victor chuckled lowly. "Good, then build faster." That winter, Grace moved her family to a modest townhouse near the San Francisco Bay. Each morning, she jogged along the pier with Ava, Theo, and Lily in a stroller, whispering stories about Manhattan skyscrapers, not as memories, but as goals. One evening, the triplets asked, "Mommy, where's Daddy?" Grace paused, looking at their curious faces. "Far away," she said softly. "But someday, you'll see him again, when truth decides it's time." She didn't add that the truth was already loading, line by line, inside a codebase called Meridian. And when it finished running, it would destroy the man who thought he'd erased her. Snow fell gently over Manhattan, frosting the windows of the Davenport penthouse like icing on glass. Inside, Cole stood before a wall of cameras, tuxedo sharp, voice dripping charm. "To new beginnings," he said, raising a glass beside his fiancée, Sable Hart, the woman who once watched Grace be thrown out like an inconvenience. The press loved them. She was America's new sweetheart, radiant in a backless Dior gown, and he, the genius billionaire, reshaping Wall Street. Behind them, the skyline gleamed, and the Ritz-Carlton hosted another champagne-drenched gala, this time celebrating the Hart Initiative, Sable's charity for underprivileged models. What no one knew. It was a shell company laundering Davenport capital funds through fake donations. Sable's smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. She'd traded youth for fame, but fame had teeth. Her reflection on the mirror behind the stage looked thinner, colder, almost frightened. That night, as photographers shouted their names, she whispered to Cole, "We need to talk about Grace." He didn't even blink. Grace doesn't exist. But she did. Thousands of miles away, in a townhouse overlooking San Francisco Bay, Grace tucked her children into bed, unaware that the man who'd betrayed her was celebrating his empire on stolen money, and that his mistress was starting to doubt him. Sable's doubts began when she found a locked drawer in Cole's home office. Curiosity curdled into dread when she saw the file label. Whitmore Holdings, transfer agreement. Inside were old contracts, Grace's signature, and a handwritten note from Cole. "Keep her silent." Her stomach twisted. That wasn't the story Cole told her. He'd claimed Grace was unstable, that she'd abandoned him for another man. But here, in black ink, were the transfer dates and proof that Grace's inheritance had funded his first 2 investment rounds. That night, Sable sat alone in a penthouse bathed in city lights, tears ruining her mascara. She opened her phone and hit record. "If anything happens to me," she said quietly, "look at Davenport Capital's charity accounts. Start with the Hart Initiative." Then she hid the recording inside a draft email labeled Wedding Playlist. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Grace's company Meridian received a new data request, a logistics analysis for a luxury fashion label, expanding its New York division. She almost declined until she saw the brand name, Hart Atelier. Her heart froze. She didn't believe in coincidences. She spent 3 nights combing through the data. Hidden between invoices and donations, her algorithm detected identical routing patterns to Davenport Capital's offshore accounts. Grace leaned back, eyes blazing with realization. He's using her. Victor confirmed it days later. "You've just uncovered a $90 million fraud trail," he said over the phone. "And the woman fronting it? She doesn't even know." Grace hesitated. Then maybe she deserves to. 10. In New York, Sable prepared for her winter campaign shoot on Fifth Avenue. She wore diamonds, smiled for Vogue, and pretended the world wasn't falling apart. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You don't know me, but I know what he did to both of us." Attached was a single image, the contract transfer bearing Grace's name. Sable's breath caught. She glanced toward the makeup mirror, where Cole's reflection appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay?" he asked smoothly. She forced a smile. "Perfect," she lied, slipping her phone under a powder case. That night, when the cameras left, she opened Grace's message again and whispered, "Maybe I'm not the villain in this story after all." And as snow blanketed Manhattan, the 2 women, once enemies, took the first steps toward a reckoning that would burn the man they both loved. The morning fog rolled over San Francisco Bay like silk when Grace walked into the glass tower of Halcyon Logistics. Her blazer still smelled faintly of baby shampoo and coffee. Theo had spilled both before she left. But today wasn't about chaos. It was about closure. Across the polished boardroom table sat executives in tailored suits, their Mont Blanc pens aligned perfectly beside thick contracts. Grace adjusted her cuff, hiding the tremor in her hand. "Let's finalize the acquisition," she said calmly. Meridian, the company she built between feedings and sleepless nights, was being sold for $48 million. It wasn't just a payday. It was validation. Proof that Grace Whitman, the forgotten wife, had created something no gossip column could tarnish. The meeting lasted an hour. When the final signature was done, the CEO leaned over. "You're an impressive woman, Miss Whitman. Any plans for what's next?" Grace smiled, sliding the pen across the table. "Yes. Cleaning up the past." That evening, she returned to the townhouse to find Martha and the triplets celebrating with a store-bought cake. Ava wore frosting on her nose. Theo tried to cut his own slice, and Lily clapped wildly. Grace laughed until tears blurred her vision. Victor called later. "Congratulations, you built something real." "I built it from the wreckage he left behind." Grace replied softly. "Now I can finally afford to rebuild my name." Victor hesitated, voice low. "And maybe your legacy too." Grace looked at the flash drive taped under her desk. The disappearance file. Not yet. Timing is everything. So, 2 weeks later, she opened a storage box labeled Whitmore Holdings. Inside were dusty ledgers, her mother's signature, and a letter she'd never noticed before. The handwriting was elegant, trembling. "If they ever try to erase you, don't fight them in public. Wait until they believe you're gone. Then return with proof." Grace exhaled shakily. Her mother had known, even back then, what kind of men the world protected. She closed the box with renewed calm. With her new wealth, Grace moved her family to a restored brownstone near the Presidio. The mornings smelled of cinnamon pancakes and sunlight. She hired a private tutor for the kids, enrolled in mindfulness therapy, and spent evenings reading the 48 Laws of Power, not to dominate, but to understand how predators thought. Yet peace was fragile. One rainy night, an email from an anonymous sender arrived, a scanned image of her old wedding photo, the one taken at the plaza. The subject line read, "Still watching." Grace's stomach turned cold. She traced the source. A New York IP tied to Davenport Capital's server. Cole knew she was alive. The next morning, she walked to the window, watching the rain smear the skyline. "If he's looking for me," she murmured, "then it's time he finds who I've become." She opened her laptop, pulling up the Meridian database. Her software now contained enough records to expose multiple shell companies under Davenport Capital, including one linked to the Heart Initiative. Grace didn't send the report to authorities. Instead, she forwarded it to Sable with a short note. "Decide who you are, his accessory or your own witness." Sable replied 2 hours later. "Meet me in New York. There's more you don't know." Grace stared at the screen, her reflection faint in the glow. The woman she saw wasn't the same one who'd begged on marble floors 8 years ago. She smiled, not with revenge, but with certainty. "Then let's finish what he started." And, in the glass reflection behind her, 3 small faces watched curiously, unaware that their mother had just declared the quiet beginning of war. 8 years after the night she was thrown out of the plaza, Grace Whitmore stepped off a plane at JFK with 3 children, 2 suitcases, and a calmness that frightened even her. The Manhattan skyline glimmered in the distance. The same towers that once looked down on her humiliation now stood waiting for her return. Martha's hands shook as she adjusted her scarf. "Are you sure about this, Grace?" "He's still powerful." Grace smiled faintly. "So am I. He just doesn't know it yet." 1. Ava tugged at her sleeve, pointing through the window. "Mom, is that where Daddy lives?" Grace paused, then knelt to meet her daughter's curious eyes. "That's where the truth lives," she said softly. "And we're going to tell it." They moved into the Whitmore brownstone on the Upper East Side, untouched since her mother's passing. Dusty chandeliers, faded portraits, and echoes of old laughter filled the hallways. Grace opened the shutters wide, sunlight spilling across the parquet floors. Martha began unpacking boxes while the children raced up the grand staircase. For the first time in years, Grace stood in the house that once defined her family's legacy. She spent the next week restoring order, repainting walls, restocking the pantry, arranging her MacBook and files on a mahogany desk. When she placed a small framed photo of her late mother beside the computer, she whispered, "We're home, Mom. But this time, on my terms." Pawn. Meanwhile, on Park Avenue, Cole Davenport sat in a meeting when his assistant slipped him an envelope. Inside was a single sheet. "Please direct all legal correspondence regarding Whitmore Holdings to Nora Kim, Esquire, representing Grace Whitmore, He froze. The room blurred around him. His CFO cleared his throat. "Sir, is everything all right?" Cole's voice came out low. "She's back." That evening, Grace walked through Central Park with Victor Hale. The sunset painted the lake gold. "He'll retaliate," Victor warned. "Cole's ego won't survive being challenged by the woman he erased." Grace nodded. "Then I won't challenge him. I'll remind him who I am." She handed Victor a sealed envelope, documents proving she still held dormant shares in Whitmore Holdings. "It's time to activate the voting clause." Victor smiled. "You always were your mother's daughter." Across town, Sable Hart sat in her dressing room after a photo shoot, scrolling through her phone. Grace's name appeared in the tabloids. Whitmore heiress returns to New York after mysterious disappearance. Sable stared at the screen, torn between dread and relief. She whispered, "She's really back." Cole entered without knocking, irritation in his stride. "We need to get ahead of this story." "By lying again?" she asked quietly. His eyes flashed. "By controlling it." She met his glare, voice steady. "Maybe you can't control it anymore." For the first time, Cole saw it defiance, and it scared him more than any headline. The next morning, Grace and Nora Kim sat in a minimalist law office overlooking Fifth Avenue. Nora slid a thick folder across the table. "Step 1. Reinstate your family's seat on the board. Step 2. Audit every Davenport subsidiary that touched Whitmore accounts." Grace exhaled slowly. "And step 3? Nora smiled. "Make him watch you win." That night, Grace tucked the triplets into bed, their laughter echoing through the brownstone. She stood by the window, watching the Manhattan lights flicker like old memories reborn. In the distance, she could see the glowing rooftop of the plaza, the scene of her worst night. She whispered to the reflection in the glass, "You took everything, Cole. But now, I'm the storm you created." And somewhere across the city, Cole Davenport woke from sleep in a cold sweat, hearing her voice before she ever spoke a word to him. The first time the public saw Grace again, it wasn't planned. A photographer spotted her leaving the River Cafe in Brooklyn with Victor Hale and the 3 children bundled in matching navy coats. Snowflakes glittered in their hair, laughter visible in little clouds of breath. The next morning, the photo was everywhere. Whitmore heiress resurfaces. With triplets. Grace didn't even know until Martha showed her the newspaper. "Your front page news again, honey," Martha said, voice trembling with pride and fear. Grace stared at the photo. For the first time in years, she didn't look broken. She looked unshakable. "Let them print it," she murmured. "I'm done hiding." Across Park Avenue, Cole Davenport slammed the same newspaper onto his desk. "Who gave this to the press?" he barked. His assistant stammered that it wasn't leaked. "The paparazzi just got lucky." Cole's jaw tightened. "There's no luck in Manhattan. Somebody wanted this." Sable, lounging on the white leather couch with her coffee, looked up calmly. Maybe the world missed her. Cole turned sharply. "She's trying to embarrass me." Sable shrugged. "Or she's just living." He stared at her, searching for loyalty, but all he found was distance. Meanwhile, Grace took the triplets for hot chocolate at a small cafe near Central Park. The air smelled of cinnamon and melted sugar. Ava scribbled on napkins, Theo counted snowflakes on the window, and Lily hummed Christmas songs softly. Grace smiled, letting the city's chaos blur outside. She checked her phone. Another message from Victor. "The board knows you're back." Cole is rattled. "Don't rush." She typed back. "Good. Let him tremble first." Later that afternoon, Nora Kim visited the brownstone with folders and coffee. "You're trending," she said, sliding her iPad across the table. Headlines filled the screen, half gossip, half admiration. Half the world thinks you faked a breakdown. The other half calls you a comeback icon. Grace smirked. "Both halves are useful." "Sure," Nora grinned. "The next board meeting's in 2 weeks. We'll reintroduce you as a silent shareholder. Let him underestimate you one last time." Grace nodded, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "He already has." At that same moment, in a sleek penthouse 3 miles away, Cole poured himself a scotch, watching a cable news segment replay the photo of Grace and the children. 8 years gone, the host said, and now she returns to New York, stronger than ever. Cole turned off the TV with a sharp click. Sable studied him quietly. "She looks happy," she said softly. "Happy people don't plot," he snapped. "Maybe they don't have to," she replied. He glared at her, but she didn't flinch. Sable was learning that silence had power, and she was done being his accessory. That evening, Grace put the children to bed. The brownstone felt alive again, the hum of radiators, the creak of old floors, the ghosts of a family legacy waking from sleep. She stood by the fireplace, scrolling through photos of the plaza on her phone. She zoomed in on a familiar ballroom chandelier, her reflection faint in the glass. Martha joined her, voice low. "Do you really plan to face him?" Grace's eyes hardened. "I don't plan to face him, Martha. I plan to make him face himself." She opened her laptop, pulling up Davenport Capital's corporate registry. One by one, she highlighted the shell companies she'd traced through her Meridian data. Her cursor hovered over one. Heart Initiative. Grace smiled coldly. "Found you." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, quiet, relentless. And somewhere in Manhattan, Cole looked out over the same snowfall, unaware that every flake carried the whisper of a storm with his name on it. The Whitmore brownstone glowed softly against the gray winter sky, but inside, the atmosphere was electric. Stacks of financial documents covered Grace's dining table like a paper battlefield. Nora Kim sat opposite her, hair tied back, scrolling through spreadsheets on her MacBook Pro while Victor Hale's analysts joined via encrypted video call. Grace sipped cold coffee, eyes focused. "Start with Davenport's charity accounts. The Heart Initiative first." Nora's fingers flew across the keyboard. Rows of data filled the screen: donations, transfers, offshore ledgers. "Look at this," she murmured. "A $1 million consulting fee sent to an address in the Cayman Islands, 2 days after a Whitmore asset sale." Grace leaned forward. "Track where it lands." A pause. Then one of Victor's analysts said quietly, "It ends up in a personal account under a trust labeled Larkspur Holdings, registered to Cole Davenport." Grace's pulse slowed. She had waited years to hear that name tied to his sins. "Good," she said. "Now make it visible." So, over the next week, Grace lived like a ghost inside her own home, barely sleeping, surviving on espresso and adrenaline. The triplets sensed the tension but didn't understand it. At night, she would kiss their foreheads and whisper, "Almost done, my loves. Almost free." During one long night, she noticed something odd. Repeated small payments from the Heart Initiative to a boutique design firm called Sable Studio. She frowned. He used her company to move money. Nora looked up. Or she helped him. Grace shook her head. "No, she doesn't even know." "How can you be sure?" Grace's eyes softened. "Because once, I was her." Meanwhile, Cole was unraveling. Davenport Capital's CFO had resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons. Rumors spread that the SEC was reviewing his accounts. Cole slammed his office door, dialing his lawyer. "Find out who's feeding them information," he snapped. But the answer was simpler than he could imagine. No one was feeding them anything yet. Grace hadn't leaked a single word. She wanted him to panic first, to rot from the inside before she ever struck. That Friday, she and Nora met Victor at a private lounge overlooking Central Park. The waiter brought a bottle of red wine, the kind Grace used to drink at investor galas when she was still Mrs. Davenport. She touched the stem of the glass, remembering. Victor handed her a sealed envelope. "Inside are the subpoenas for his offshore accounts. The moment you sign, the clock starts ticking." Grace hesitated, staring at the signature line. "Once this begins, it can't be undone." Victor's tone was steady. "Neither can what he did to you." She signed. Back in her brownstone, Grace turned on the TV. Every major news network buzzed with whispers of a pending corporate investigation. She watched Cole's face flash across the screen, smiling confidently, pretending nothing was wrong. His arrogance was his addiction. His downfall would come from feeding it. A notification pinged on her laptop. An email from Sable. "I think I'm ready to talk." Grace exhaled, heart thudding. She typed back. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Central Park bench near the carousel. No cameras." That night, as the city slept, Grace stood on the balcony, snow melting against her palm. Below, Fifth Avenue shimmered in silence. You built your empire on my name, she whispered into the wind. Now you'll watch me reclaim it. She turned off the light, leaving only the faint reflection of her children's drawings on the wall, proof of everything she had fought for. And across Park Avenue, Cole Davenport poured himself another drink, unaware that the woman he once called fragile had just signed the document that would end his kingdom. The first blow didn't come from the media. It came from the courthouse. A courier arrived at Grace's brownstone early Monday morning, delivering a thick envelope stamped Davenport versus Whitmore petition for custody. Grace read it in silence. Her pulse didn't quicken. Her fingers didn't tremble. She'd expected a counterstrike, just not this soon. Martha gasped. He wants the children? After what he did? Grace folded the papers neatly. He doesn't want them, Martha. He wants control. Bow. The petition painted her as an unstable absentee mother, claiming she'd abducted the triplets and fled the country years earlier. Cole's lawyers demanded immediate temporary custody, arguing that her mental fragility endangered the children's welfare. Grace exhaled slowly. He's desperate. Nora Kim arrived an hour later, heels clicking on the marble floor. She skimmed the papers and smirked. Classic projection. We'll burn this in court. Grace's calm returned like armor. Then we start today. Across Park Avenue, Cole stood before a row of cameras, Sable at his side in a white coat and black sunglasses. His statement was slick, practiced. This is a private family matter, he said gravely. But as a father, I have an obligation to protect my children. The reporters erupted with questions. Where had Grace been? Why was she hiding? Who were the children's guardians? Cole smiled through it all, every word measured for optics. Sable said nothing. She kept her gaze low, lips pressed tight. She was beginning to understand the weight of the lies she'd helped polish for years. That night, in their penthouse, she confronted him. You're dragging her children into this? Cole's tone turned icy. They're mine too. No, they're not, she whispered. They never were. His jaw locked. Watch your words. I am, she said softly. For once in my life, I am. 10. The custody hearing took place 3 days later in a quiet family courtroom downtown. Grace entered in a simple navy suit, her hair tied back. No jewelry, no theatrics. Nora walked beside her, carrying a black briefcase. Cole arrived in a tailored suit, flanked by a wall of lawyers. He smirked when he saw Grace. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, adjusted her glasses. Mr. Davenport, your motion claims the mother is unfit. On what grounds? Cole's attorney launched into a rehearsed speech about abandonment, instability, and mental health concerns. When he finished, Nora stood. Your Honor, we have exhibits. She projected a video onto the courtroom screen, security footage from the Plaza Hotel 8 years ago. The room fell silent as Cole appeared on screen, shoving Grace against the wall, calling security, dismissing her as unwell. The judge's expression hardened. Mr. Davenport, is this you? Cole's lawyer fumbled. That was taken out of context. Context, Nora interrupted smoothly. Where a pregnant wife is assaulted and humiliated in public. Grace said nothing. Her silence filled the room louder than any accusation. After reviewing evidence, medical records, school reports, testimonies from teachers, the judge's ruling was brief. Full physical and legal custody remains with Miss Whitmore. Any future petitions will be subject to psychological evaluation of Mr. Davenport. Cole's face turned to stone. Grace stood, collected her papers, and walked out without a glance in his direction. Outside, the flash of cameras painted the courthouse steps in white light. Reporters shouted questions, but she kept walking, her children's laughter echoing faintly from the car. That night, as she tucked them into bed, Ava asked, Mommy, are we safe now? Grace brushed her hair gently. We are, and we'll stay that way. When the children fell asleep, she stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer like old ghosts. She whispered, You tried to use them as weapons, Cole. Now they're my reason to win. And across town, Cole poured another drink, staring at the custody ruling on his desk, realizing for the first time that he was losing control, one piece at a time. The elevator hummed as it rose to the 34th floor of the Whitmore Holdings Tower, slicing through Manhattan's morning skyline. Grace stood alone inside, her reflection fractured across the mirrored walls. Part mother, part strategist, part ghost, come back to haunt her own legacy. Her palms were steady, her breathing slow. She'd waited 8 years for this. When the doors opened, Victor Hale was waiting in the hallway. His suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable. "The board's already gathered," he said. "They think you're here to ask for forgiveness." Grace smiled faintly. "Then let's disappoint them." Inside the boardroom, 12 directors sat around a glossy walnut table. The room smelled faintly of old money and power. Mont Blanc pens, Cartier watches, polished shoes. Cole Davenport occupied the head seat, flanked by attorneys and his ever-present smirk. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said smoothly, as if the years hadn't existed. "Or do you prefer Miss Whitman these days?" Grace met his eyes. "I prefer chairwoman." The murmurs around the table were immediate. One director adjusted his tie. Another cleared his throat. Cole leaned back, mock amusement curling his lips. "You don't have standing here." "Actually," Nora said from Grace's right side, opening a leather folder. "She does." She slid forward a document stamped and notarized. The dormant voting trust her mother had created before her death. Victor added, "The trust grants Miss Whitmore controlling interest upon proof of reputational harm to the family legacy." The video from the plaza, the fraudulent transfers, the custody ruling, all meet that condition. Cole's smile faltered. "This is absurd." Grace interrupted softly. "No, Cole. What's absurd is thinking you could bury my mother's name and keep her company as your toy." For the next 40 minutes, the room turned into a storm of voices. Some directors tried to side with Cole, citing stability, but Grace countered every argument with calm precision. She'd studied every report, memorized every profit drop hidden under his PR gloss. Then she dropped her ace. A presentation from Meridian's algorithm showing how Davenport Capital's shell companies had bled Whitmore funds for years. Charts, transfers, timestamps, undeniable truth, glowing cold blue on the projector. Cole's face lost color. "You can't use that data. It's proprietary." "It's evidence," Nora replied. "And as of last week, subpoenaed." Silence followed. One of the elder directors, Mr. Baines, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "I served under your mother, Grace. She believed leadership meant accountability. I vote we honor that." Another director nodded. Then another. The vote passed, 7-5. Cole stood abruptly, rage boiling beneath his polished composure. "You think you've won something? You'll destroy everything we built." Grace met his glare evenly. "No, Cole, I'm rebuilding what you corrupted." He took a step closer, voice low enough for only her to hear. "You don't know who you're playing with." She smiled slightly. "I do. That's why I'm not afraid anymore." When the meeting adjourned, reporters were already gathered in the lobby. Grace walked out beside Victor and Nora, calm under the camera flashes. Someone shouted, "Mrs. Davenport, how does it feel to take your husband's company?" She paused, the winter sunlight spilling across her face. "I didn't take his company," she said evenly. "I reclaimed my family's." Later that evening, she stood alone in the boardroom, the skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. She touched the back of the chair once occupied by her mother and whispered, "It's yours again." Time. And far below, Cole stormed into the street, his reflection fractured in every window, for the first time realizing that the empire he'd stolen now belonged to the woman he'd underestimated most. The invitation arrived wrapped in ivory cardstock and sealed with gold wax. The Bright Futures Gala, hosted by Victor Hale and Whitmore Holdings. The Plaza Hotel. Grace read it twice, a wry smile forming on her lips. 8 years ago, that ballroom had been the site of her humiliation. Now, it would be her stage. Martha's eyes widened when she saw the embossed lettering. "You're really going back there?" Grace closed the envelope gently. "Yes. The place that buried me will be the place that resurrects me." For weeks, New York's social pages buzzed with anticipation. Billionaires, investors, and fashion icons would all attend. The rumors spread quickly. Would Grace Whitmore make an appearance? Would she confront Cole Davenport? Cole laughed when he read the headlines. "She's bluffing," he told Sable, sipping scotch in his penthouse. "She doesn't have the courage to face me in public." Sable didn't answer. She was watching a message Grace had sent days earlier. A single line. Truth wears better than Dior. Cole's arrogance blinded him. He didn't notice Sable quietly deleting every incriminating message, every falsified receipt he'd sent through her charity foundation. The night of the gala arrived. The plaza shimmered like a crown under crystal chandeliers. Black Mercedes lined the curb, cameras flashing as New York's elite swept through the revolving doors. Grace stepped out of her car in a black velvet gown that caught the light like liquid midnight. No jewelry, no entourage. Just poise. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters whispered her name. She came. Inside the ballroom, conversations froze as she entered. Even the orchestra faltered for a beat. Cole was near the center, laughing with the senator, unaware until the room's energy shifted. Then he turned and froze. Their eyes met for the first time in 8 years. He moved toward her, his practiced smile slipping into something colder. "You have nerve showing up here." Grace's tone was silk over steel. "This hotel holds history for us. I thought we should make new memories." Cole's jaw tightened. "You won't ruin this night." "I don't have to," she replied softly. "You already did." Dada. At 9 p.m., Victor Hale took the stage. "Tonight," he announced, "we honor those who restore integrity and leadership." The lights dimmed. The projector flickered on. Grace stood still, hands clasped. This was the moment she'd orchestrated for months. The first image appeared, smiling children from Whitmore's charity programs. The crowd applauded warmly. Then the next slide appeared, the Heart Initiative logo. A murmur rippled. The following slide showed donation trails leading directly to Davenport Capital's shell accounts. Cole's face drained of color. "Turn that off," he hissed, but the next slide appeared. Sable's signed affidavit and time-stamped wire receipts. The room gasped. Sable herself appeared in the back doorway, wearing a simple white dress, holding a folder. Reporters turned like a wave. She walked forward, her voice steady into the microphone. "The funds you applauded last year were stolen. I was blind." She wasn't. She nodded toward Grace. The ballroom erupted, cameras flashing, whispers spreading like wildfire. Cole tried to leave, but 2 federal investigators quietly stepped into his path, flashing badges. Grace never raised her voice. She simply stood beneath the chandelier that had once glared down at her shame. "Power without conscience," she said softly, "always pays its debt." Applause rose like thunder. As she exited into the cold Manhattan night, the same marble lobby reflected her calm smile. Martha waited by the car. "It's over?" Grace looked up at the glittering chandelier through the glass doors. "No," she said quietly. "This is just the reckoning's overture." And behind those golden doors, Cole Davenport watched his empire begin to crack, exactly where he once believed he was untouchable. Morning broke over Manhattan with the kind of sharp, glassy sunlight that makes everything look too real. The city's headline screamed one name: Cole Davenport under federal investigation. Photos from the gala filled every paper, Grace radiant under the chandeliers, Sable pale beside investigators, Cole's jaw tight as he was escorted out of the plaza. Grace sat at her kitchen table, coffee untouched, while her phone buzzed non-stop. Victor's message was brief. "It's begun. Check your email." To men. She opened the attachment. A full digital dossier, compiled overnight by Nora's legal team. Inside were over 200 pages. Fake charities, shell corporations, bank transfers, and proof that Cole had embezzled from his investors for nearly a decade. Every dollar stolen had a date, a signature, and a paper trail that ended with his name. Grace scrolled through, numb. The man who once told her she was too fragile for business had built his empire on her inheritance. Every skyscraper, every car, every diamond Sable wore. All of it came from the fortune her mother had left. Martha appeared in the doorway with a tray of breakfast for the children. "It's all over the news," she said softly. Grace didn't look up. "No, it's only just starting." Across the city, Cole's penthouse felt like a cage. He paced before the window, tie undone, eyes bloodshot. The news played on mute, his name flashing beside words like fraud, conspiracy, and indictment. His lawyer stood nearby, sweating through his suit. They've subpoenaed your emails, sir. The SEC's involved. We'll need full disclosure. Cole slammed his glass onto the counter. Full disclosure will destroy me. Then pray they take pity, the lawyer muttered. Sable sat silently on the couch, a cup of cold tea trembling in her hands. She hadn't slept since the gala. When Cole glared at her, she didn't flinch. You did this, he spat. She met his eyes. No, Cole. You did this. I just stopped lying for you. By noon, the dossier went public. Nora had timed the release perfectly, one copy to the Wall Street Journal, another to the FBI's press office, and a third to the Whitmore Holdings website. The statement read simply, "Integrity is not a slogan. It's restitution." Grace's inbox flooded with messages from shareholders, employees, even strangers thanking her for exposing the corruption. But it wasn't victory she felt. It was vindication mixed with sorrow. She thought of the years she spent hiding, the nights whispering promises to 3 tiny babies that justice would come. Now it had, but it tasted bittersweet. That evening, she met Victor and Nora in his Park Avenue office. The dossier lay on the table between them, its pages heavy with truth. Victor nodded slowly. He'll be charged before the week's out. You've done it. Grace stared out the window, the city glowing below. I didn't do it for revenge, she said. I did it to end the silence. Nora smiled faintly. Either way, it's poetic justice. Later that night, Grace took a walk through Central Park. The air was crisp, the city unusually quiet. She stopped by the carousel where she'd met Sable weeks ago. On the bench, she found an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single USB drive labeled Legacy. Back home, she plugged it into her laptop. A video began to play, an old home recording from her father's office. He was younger, smiling proudly beside a teenage Grace. His voice cracked slightly as he said, "If the world ever forgets who you are, remind them by what you build, not what they broke." Grace sat in the dim glow of the screen, tears welling. The dossier had destroyed Cole, but this reminder rebuilt her. She whispered, "Thank you, Dad. I've reminded them." And across Manhattan, Cole Davenport watched the same video leak online, realizing the world now knew he'd built his empire on stolen dreams. The morning after the dossier broke, the city's pulse quickened with gossip. Headlines filled digital billboards from Times Square to Wall Street. MODELTURNEDM, OGUL's empire collapses, and Cole Davenport's charity fraud exposed. Reporters camped outside his penthouse, cameras flashing like a storm of judgment. But inside those walls, silence reigned. The kind of silence that only comes after destruction. Sable Hart sat by the window in a silk robe, mascara smudged, phone buzzing endlessly. Brands canceled campaigns, fashion houses severed contracts, and her agency had already suspended her. On every network, her name was tied to scandal. She scrolled through comments, traitor, liar, accomplice. The fame she once bathed in had turned poisonous overnight. Cole paced behind her, tie loosened, his voice low and venomous. "You think they'll forgive you if you throw me under the bus? You were part of this. You signed those checks." Sable looked up slowly. "You told me they were for charity events." "They were." In spirit, his smirk was bitter. "You liked the lifestyle too much to ask questions." Her eyes glistened. "You made me believe I owed you everything." Cole stepped closer, his voice hardening. "You do. Without me, you'd still be waiting tables in Ohio." Sable flinched, the humiliation slicing deep. Then her expression changed. No tears, no pleading, just clarity. "You're right," she whispered. "But you forgot something, Cole." He frowned. "What?" She turned to face him fully, the morning light catching the diamond bracelet he once gave her. "You taught me how to survive men like you." By noon, Sable walked out of the penthouse carrying only one silver Rimowa suitcase. The doorman avoided her gaze, whispering condolences she didn't need. Outside, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. She didn't answer. She climbed into a black car and gave the driver one address. Nora Kim's law office, 5th Avenue. When she entered the conference room, Grace was already there, poised, unshaken, a quiet strength radiating from her. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Grace broke the silence. You didn't have to come. Sable took a breath. I did, because I'm done being his alibi. She set a folder on the table, printed bank statements, private texts, recordings. Everything he made me do, every lie he told. You can use it. Nora leaned forward, astonished. You're willing to testify? Yes. Her voice cracked slightly. But I want the truth out my way. Not as gossip, as confession. Grace studied her, searching for sincerity. Why now? Sable met her eyes. Because I finally saw what I became. The woman who stood and watched another woman get destroyed. I can't live with that anymore. For a long moment, the two women simply sat there, the betrayed and the accomplice, the broken and the ashamed, realizing that redemption sometimes comes from standing beside your victim instead of hiding behind your guilt. That night, Sable went live on national television. The world expected another denial, another PR spin. Instead, her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. I was complicit in the lies of a man who called himself a visionary, she said. But I was blinded by luxury and fear. Grace Whitmore's strength opened my eyes. She deserves justice, and so do the people he deceived. The statement exploded across social media. The same tabloids that once worshipped her now called her brave. Grace watched from her brownstone, silent. Martha murmured, "Do you believe her?" Grace smiled faintly. "Belief isn't the point. Truth is." Sable ended her broadcast with one final line. To every woman who ever thought she couldn't leave. I did. And so can you. And somewhere in the city, Cole Davenport threw his remote at the TV screen, realizing the one woman he thought he owned had just become his most dangerous witness. The scandal had consumed New York. Cole Davenport's empire was collapsing faster than anyone imagined. But inside the Whitmore brownstone, life moved differently, quietly, softly, anchored by three small voices who still believed their mother could fix anything. One rainy morning, Grace woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. Ava, Theo, and Lily were sitting at the table with colored pencils scattered everywhere, drawing pictures of Mommy saving the world. Theo proudly held up his, a stick figure wearing a crown standing over a crying man in a suit. Grace chuckled. Who's that supposed to be? Theo grinned. The bad man. Grace smiled, but her eyes darkened slightly. Then maybe Mommy doesn't need a crown, she said, brushing his hair back. Just courage. Later that day, their school called. A local news station wanted to feature the children of the woman who exposed Wall Street's biggest scandal. Grace's first instinct was to decline, but the triplets begged. Please, Mom, we'll just talk about truth. Pie. After a long pause, she agreed, on one condition, no mention of Cole, no mention of wealth, just honesty. The interview was filmed in the school library. The set was simple. 3 chairs, bright lights, and soft laughter filling the room. The reporter asked gently, "What does your mom teach you about being brave?" Ava, the oldest, answered first. "She says being brave doesn't mean yelling. It means standing when everyone else sits." Theo chimed in. "She says truth is like the sun. Even when clouds hide it, it still burns." Lily, the quietest, looked straight into the camera. "She says love isn't weakness. It's how you win without becoming mean." The crew went silent. The interviewer blinked away tears. Grace, watching behind the cameras, pressed her hand over her heart. The segment aired 2 nights later on national television. Within hours, it went viral. Millions watched the triplets' pure voices pierce through cynicism. Grace Whitmore's children remind America of what integrity looks like, one journalist tweeted. Hashtags like #TruthIsGrace and #Whitmore Triplets trended worldwide. Brands that had distanced themselves from the Whitmore name began calling again. But Grace refused sponsorships, interviews, or magazine covers. She told Nora, "I won't let them turn innocence into PR." Instead, she took the triplets for a quiet day at the American Museum of Natural History. They wandered through the echoing halls, their small hands holding hers. Standing beneath the giant blue whale exhibit, Theo whispered, "It's so big, Mom." Grace smiled. So is truth. Across town, Cole watched the same interview from his lawyer's office. His hand tightened around a glass of whiskey as his children's faces filled the screen. When Lily spoke her last line, "Love is how you win without becoming mean," he flinched. His lawyer cleared his throat. The public sympathy's entirely with her now. The prosecutors are moving fast. You should consider a deal. Cole turned off the TV. "No," he muttered. "Not yet." That night, Grace tucked her children into bed. Ava asked softly, "Mommy, are you happy now?" Grace sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I'm proud. That's better than happy." Lily yawned. "Are we safe?" Grace kissed her forehead. "Always." One. When the lights went out, she lingered by the door, watching their peaceful faces. They were the proof that love could outlast cruelty, that decency could still win in a world addicted to power. As she turned off the hallway light, her phone buzzed, a new email from an anonymous sender. "You're not done yet. Check tomorrow's headlines." Grace's heart skipped, but her expression stayed calm. "Then let the world watch," she whispered. And in the glow of the streetlights, 3 children slept soundly, unaware that their voices had just turned their mother into a national symbol of truth. The conference room on the 29th floor of the federal building was pure intimidation. Glass walls, gray carpet, and a skyline view of lower Manhattan that reminded everyone how small they really were. Cole Davenport sat at the polished table, flanked by 2 attorneys who whispered frantic instructions. Across from him, Grace waited beside Nora Kim and a federal prosecutor. Her posture was calm, almost regal, a quiet strength that made Cole's confidence look theatrical. A court reporter set up her recorder. "This deposition is now on the record," she said. Cole leaned back in his chair, forcing a smirk. "I assume this is another attempt to humiliate me publicly?" Grace didn't blink. "No, Cole. This is accountability." The first hour was routine dates, signatures, financial statements. Cole parried every question with polished evasions. "I don't recall. That was a delegate's decision. I had no personal knowledge." Then Nora opened a new folder labeled Exhibit 47. "Mr. Davenport," she said, "this is a transfer authorization from Whitmore Holdings to the Hart Initiative. Your initials appear here." He squinted. So, this document shows the funds were redirected through 5 shell companies, 3 of which are registered under aliases connected to your Cayman account. How? Cole's voice sharpened. "You're twisting facts." Grace leaned forward, her tone quiet but piercing. "No, Cole, you twisted lives." The prosecutor pressed play on a small recorder. A familiar voice filled the room. Cole's ordering an assistant to make the donations clean and use Hart's name for PR cover. Cole froze. His attorney stammered, "That could be fabricated." "It's your voice," Nora said calmly. "Time-stamped, verified, and subpoenaed." Cole's facade cracked. He shifted, tugging at his collar. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" he hissed at Grace. "You are nothing without me." Grace's voice stayed level. "You're right, Cole. I was nothing to you. But to our children, to the people you deceived, and to the legacy you tried to steal, I'm everything you failed to be." The court reporter's fingers trembled over the keys, capturing every word. Outside, the media circus had grown feral. Reporters waited by the revolving doors, eager for sound bites. Victor Hale stood by a black sedan, watching from a distance. He'd seen this performance before, the mighty pretending not to fall until gravity made them kneel. Inside, the prosecutor closed her folder. "We're done here, Mr. Davenport. Expect formal charges within the week." Cole shot up, pointing at Grace. "You'll regret this. When I go down, you go with me." Grace gathered her papers, calm as ever. "I already went down, Cole. 8 years ago. You pushed me out of the plaza. This time, you're the one falling." She walked toward the exit. Cole lunged as if to follow, but a U.S. Marshal stepped between them. "Mr. Davenport, please remain seated." In the hallway, Nora let out a long breath. "You realize that was the nail in his coffin, right?" Grace nodded. "It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was truth recorded, word for word." Victor joined them by the elevators, a rare smile softening his sharp features. "You handled that like your mother would." Grace met his gaze. "No, I handled it like me." That night, The footage from the deposition leaked online. Millions watched the once untouchable billionaire stammer, sweat, and unravel before his ex-wife's quiet composure. Cole had spent years silencing her voice. Now her silence spoke louder than his empire ever did. And as the city lights flickered outside her window, Grace closed her eyes and whispered, "One more truth, and the world will see who he really is." The invitation came from NBC's flagship program Morning Line, America's most watched talk show. The producer's email read simply, "We want your story, not the scandal, the woman." Grace stared at the message for a long time, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. Nora urged caution. "Television is unpredictable. They'll bait you for sound bites." Grace smiled faintly. "Then I'll give them silence they can't edit." The interview took place at the River Cafe, the same spot where she'd been photographed months earlier with Victor and the children. It overlooked the East River, the skyline gleaming in the background. She arrived in a cream suit, elegant but simple, a single Cartier bracelet glinting at her wrist. The air was crisp, the kind of morning that felt like both an ending and a beginning. The host, Diane Mercer, greeted her warmly but cautiously. Cameras rolled, the red light blinked, and America leaned closer. "Grace Whitmore," Diane began. "You've become a symbol of strength after betrayal. But millions want to know, how did you survive being erased?" Grace didn't rush. She folded her hands on the table, eyes steady. "I didn't survive because I'm strong," she said. "I survived because I had no choice. When someone takes everything, you learn the weight of what can't be taken: dignity, truth, love." The interviewer leaned in. "And forgiveness? Do you forgive Cole Davenport?" Grace hesitated, the faintest smile touching her lips. "Forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook. It's taking yourself off it. I don't carry his sins anymore. They belong to him now." Behind the cameras, Nora and Victor exchanged glances. It was perfect. Every word landed like truth, dressed in grace. Diane continued, "There's speculation about your next move. You've reclaimed your company, won in court, and exposed massive fraud. What comes after victory?" Grace looked out toward the water, voice soft but sure. "You don't win by destroying, you win by rebuilding. My focus now is restoring what my mother built, with honesty, with heart. I want my children to see that power can be kind." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was reverent. Then Diane asked, "If Cole Davenport were watching this right now, what would you say to him?" Grace met the camera directly. "Thank you," she said quietly. Diane blinked. "Thank you?" "Yes," Grace replied. "For showing me that strength isn't about being feared. It's about standing after the fall. Without his cruelty, I wouldn't have discovered my courage. Without his lies, I wouldn't have found the truth." When the interview ended, the crew applauded softly. "Off air," Diane murmured. "That was extraordinary. You didn't just tell your story. You changed the tone of it." Grace smiled gently. "That's the point. Truth doesn't need shouting." The segment aired the next morning. Within hours, it flooded every social feed. Viewers called it the most moving interview of the year. Hashtags number Grace Whitmore and number Forgive Without Fear trended worldwide. Commentators praised her poise. Survivors of betrayal wrote messages of gratitude. Cole watched from a darkened apartment, whiskey glass in hand. The anchor's voice said, "Grace Whitmore, proof that dignity outlives scandal." He threw the glass against the wall, shards scattering like the empire he'd built on deceit. Meanwhile, Grace returned home to find her children watching the replay on TV. Ava looked up, eyes shining. "Mommy, everyone says you're brave." Grace knelt, wrapping them in her arms. "No, sweetheart. We're brave." "Shand." She kissed their foreheads, whispering, "We told the truth. That's our legacy." That night, as Manhattan glittered across the river, Grace opened a message from Victor. "The world believes in you again. Tomorrow, we begin phase 2. Rebuilding." She typed back, "No, Victor. Tomorrow, we begin living." And somewhere downtown, Cole realized too late that the woman he'd silenced had become the voice of every woman he'd ever underestimated. When morning broke over Wall Street, the digital ticker on the Reuters screen flashed red. Davenport Capital stock plunges 62% in one day. Analysts scrambled to interpret the collapse, But deep down, everyone knew the market was finally delivering its verdict. Grace watched the broadcast from her office at Whitmore Holdings. She didn't gloat. She simply closed her laptop and whispered, "It's done." Nora entered moments later, holding a stack of legal briefs. Federal indictments are confirmed. Wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. He's finished. Grace nodded. No one's untouchable forever. Outside the window, the skyline shimmered like liquid glass. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe fully, not victory, but peace. Across town, chaos consumed Davenport Capital's headquarters. Phones rang non-stop, executives shouted, and security guards escorted employees out with boxes. The lobby, once marble and confidence, now smelled of sweat and fear. Cole barged into his office, tie crooked, face pale. His CFO stood waiting, resignation letter in hand. "The board's voting you out," he said quietly. Cole laughed bitterly. "You think this company survives without me?" The man's eyes were tired. "It already is, sir." "Under her name." Cole froze. "Her name?" The CFO nodded. "Whitmore Holdings just bought 25% of our distressed assets. She's literally owning your downfall." Cole's laugh died in his throat. That afternoon, Grace met Victor at the peninsula's rooftop terrace. The sky was silver blue, the air crisp with the scent of city rain. He raised a glass of sparkling water. "To poetic justice." She smiled. "To accountability." Victor chuckled. "Same thing in your case." They watched the skyline together in silence. The same skyline that once symbolized her pain, now glowing as a monument to survival. "I've transferred control of the pension fund and employee benefits back to Whitmore," Victor said. "You've earned your reputation back." Grace shook her head gently. "No, Victor. I'm just giving people what they were always owed." He studied her for a moment. "You sound like your mother." Grace's smile softened. "Then I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be." News outlets around the world picked up the story. The Wall Street Journal hailed her as the conscience of capitalism. Forbes ran a cover titled, "Grace Whitmore, the woman who reset the game." Every platform replayed clips of her calm composure at the gala, her restraint in interviews, her refusal to seek revenge. She had become the symbol of redemption in an industry built on greed. Meanwhile, Sable Hart announced the launch of the Phoenix Foundation, a non-profit supporting women leaving abusive partnerships in the entertainment world. She publicly credited Grace for inspiring her transformation. "Sometimes the person you feared most teaches you who you are," Sable said tearfully at the press conference. Grace watched the coverage quietly, proud but cautious. Martha entered with tea. "You changed everything, child." Grace shook her head. "I just stopped pretending." That evening, the triplets joined her on the balcony of the brownstone. The city hummed beneath them. Ava pointed to the tallest skyscraper, Davenport Tower, now under foreclosure. "Mom, is that his building?" Grace nodded. "Not for long." Theo frowned. "Will you buy it?" Grace smiled. "Maybe. But not to live in. To turn it into something good, something honest." Lily's voice was soft. "Like a school." Grace looked at her daughter and nodded. "Exactly like that." Down on Wall Street, the final bell rang. Davenport Capital was officially delisted. The empire that once humiliated her had been erased, not by revenge, but by consequence. And as night fell, Grace looked out over the city she'd reclaimed, whispering to the wind, "Justice doesn't shout, it settles its debts." The courthouse on Foley Square buzzed with anticipation. Reporters lined the marble steps, microphones pointed like weapons, waiting for the trial that would define an era of greed and consequence. Inside, every seat was filled. Cole Davenport, once the golden god of Wall Street, sat at the defense table in a navy suit that suddenly seemed too big for him. His once smooth confidence had hardened into fear. Across the aisle sat Grace Whitmore, poised in a simple cream blouse and tailored black suit. No spectacle, no jewelry, no entourage, just truth. The one thing Cole could never buy. Nora Kim sat beside her, legal papers organized with surgical precision. Victor Hale watched from the back row, arms crossed, the faintest smile on his face. The judge entered. Court is now in session. Cole's attorney stood first, weaving a desperate defense. misplaced trust, exaggerated allegations, a man unfairly vilified by the media. But the words rang hollow. The jury's eyes were already on Grace, the woman who had risen from humiliation to integrity. When it was Grace's turn to testify, the room stilled. She took the stand, right hand raised, voice steady. 8 years ago, I was thrown out of the Plaza Hotel by the man sitting there, she said, nodding toward Cole. That night, I carried his child. He told the world I was unstable, unfit, unworthy. I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I was rebuilding. Today, I'm here not for vengeance, but for accountability. Her words cut through the air like glass. The prosecutor asked how Cole had used Whitmore funds. Grace detailed the forged transfers, the shell corporations, and the charities that never existed. Each revelation chipped away at Cole's illusion until there was nothing left but shame. The jury leaned forward. Even the judge seemed to breathe slower. Then came the recording, the one Sable had secretly provided. Cole's voice echoed through the courtroom. Move the money through Heart's charity. Make sure Grace's name is nowhere near it. If she ever comes back, she'll have nothing to stand on. Cole's face drained of color. The courtroom murmured. His lawyer rose to object, but the judge's gavel struck sharply. Overruled. Cole slammed his hands on the table. You think you can destroy me with that? Grace looked directly at him. No, Cole. You did that yourself. The prosecution rested. The defense had no witnesses. Even Sable appeared briefly, composed, clear, remorseful. She testified that she'd been manipulated and controlled. But she took responsibility for her silence. When she left the stand, she met Grace's eyes. Grace nodded. Not in forgiveness, but in understanding. The closing argument was short and surgical. Power without morality is rot, the prosecutor said. And rot always reveals itself. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice echoed, guilty on all counts. Cole's shoulders sagged. Reporters scribbled furiously as the judge read the sentence. 10 years in federal prison, full restitution of $82 million, and permanent disqualification from corporate governance. Grace didn't smile. She just exhaled, a breath 8 years in the making. As marshals led Cole away, he turned to her, voice trembling. Was it worth it? Grace met his eyes. Every scar, she said quietly, was the price of freedom. Outside, the courthouse steps erupted with flashbulbs. Nora raised a hand to block the lights. You did it, she whispered. No, Grace said softly, watching the sunset spill gold across the city skyline. Truth did. That night, she returned home to the brownstone. The triplets were waiting with a handmade sign that read, Welcome home, Mom. Ava wrapped her arms around her waist. It's over, right? Grace smiled, tears shining. It's over, and we won. Tau. And in a prison cell across the river, Cole Davenport stared at the concrete wall, finally understanding that the greatest punishment wasn't losing his freedom. It was knowing that Grace had found hers. Spring painted Manhattan in soft gold, and for the first time in years, the city felt gentle. The headlines had moved on. The scandal that once devoured every broadcast was now just a paragraph in business history books. But for Grace Whitmore, this was the beginning, not the epilogue. The Whitmore brownstone stood open to sunlight. The air smelled of coffee, lilies, and children's laughter. Ava practiced piano by the window, hitting the wrong notes with confidence. Theo built a Lego skyscraper taller than his head. Lily sat on the floor, reading aloud from Charlotte's Web, her voice soft and certain. Grace leaned against the doorway, smiling. That's beautiful, Lily. The little girl looked up. It's about friendship. Grace nodded. All the best stories are. Send her. Later that afternoon, she met Victor Hale at the River Calf, the same place where her story had quietly reignited months before. The cherry blossoms outside danced in the wind, scattering petals across the water. Victor lifted his espresso. So, Chairwoman Whitmore, what's next? Grace laughed lightly. No more titles. Just Grace. He grinned. You've rebuilt an empire. You can allow yourself a nameplate. She shook her head. Empires crumble, homes don't. I want to build something that lasts, not a business, but a legacy. Victor's eyes softened. And you will. You already have. Before leaving, he handed her a small envelope. Inside was a deed. The Davenport Tower is yours now. The bankruptcy courts transferred it this morning. Grace stared at it, stunned. I don't want his ghosts. Then fill it with light, Victor said simply. Turn it into something better. 1. Weeks later, the once cold skyscraper reopened under a new name, the Whitmore Learning Institute. Instead of bankers, its halls filled with students, single mothers studying finance, women launching startups, teens learning ethics and economics. Grace gave the opening speech herself. I built this building on broken promises, she said, voice steady. But we're here to teach how to keep them. Power means nothing if it isn't shared. The audience rose in applause. In the front row, Sable sat quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks. When the applause faded, she approached Grace and hugged her. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Grace smiled. We both needed redemption. Now we have it. That summer, Grace took the triplets to Montauk for their first real vacation. They collected seashells, built sandcastles, and roasted marshmallows as the sun sank into the Atlantic. Mommy, Theo asked as they watched the waves. Are we rich now? Grace chuckled. We're happy. That's better. Ava squeezed her hand. Will we ever see Daddy again? Grace hesitated, eyes on the horizon. Maybe one day. Everyone deserves a chance to change. She didn't tell them that, from a prison library miles away, Cole had written her a letter, not asking for forgiveness, but acknowledging his crimes. You were always the light, he wrote. I just learned too late how much darkness hated it. She never replied. Some truths didn't need closure. They needed distance. Months later, Grace stood in her garden beneath blooming magnolias, wearing a simple white dress. Daniel Carter, the quiet CEO of a green tech company who'd once admired her courage from afar, slipped a ring onto her finger. Their wedding was small, private, radiant with laughter. As she looked around the garden, her children grinning, Martha wiping tears, Victor raising a toast. Grace realized her life had come full circle. She whispered to Daniel, We don't need forever. We just need peace. He smiled. You've earned it. That night, she tucked the triplets into bed, then stood by the window overlooking the glittering skyline. The city was still loud, still ruthless, but it no longer frightened her. Justice doesn't end with punishment, she whispered. It ends when healing begins. And as the lights of New York shimmered like promises reborn, Grace Whitmore finally understood, home isn't where you live, it's where you rise. So that's how the story ends, and if you're still here, my dear friend, it probably means something inside you was touched, maybe by pain, maybe by hope, maybe by the quiet strength Grace found in herself. Life will always test us, just as it tested her. But as the Stoics said, what stands in the way becomes the way. Every betrayal, every heartbreak, every fall is not the end. It's the beginning of who you're meant to become. Grace's journey reminds us that power without kindness is hollow, that forgiveness is freedom, and that healing isn't forgetting. It's understanding. Like Marcus Aurelius once wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. So if you've ever felt broken, remember, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to rise from. If this story moved you, even a little, hit that like, share it with someone who might need this reminder, and don't forget to subscribe, because somewhere out there, another Grace is still fighting her storm, waiting to hear that she can win too. And maybe that voice could come from you.